The day Anna and I got married, the men she hated most came to her for help. He said, "Anna, help me. I've been kidnapped." Everyone said that Anna loved me to death and despised Makoto with all her heart. It's only because I once acted heroically to save Makoto that I ended up being dragged into a vegetative state because of him. During the 3 years I lay unconscious, Anna often said, "What a stupid man. I don't know why you bothered to save him. You wasted 3 years of your life." Yet, despite all her complaints, she handled his endless messes. Even on the day of our wedding, she left me at the altar, full of guilt, saying, "Sorry, I have to go save Makoto. He's been kidnapped because of me. I love you, George. I'll definitely come back and marry you. This wedding won't be cancelled." The whole city watched as they laughed at me, but I walked toward Willow, Anna's beautiful and charming sister, who was sitting in the audience. I said, "Anna is right. I don't plan to cancel the wedding, but who the bride is, it doesn't really matter. Willow, may I have your company for the rest of my life?" Later, Anna searched frantically for me, only to see me standing with another woman in front of her. The woman, with a cold and proud gaze, said, "Anna, call him brother-in-law." Chapter 1. It hurts. A piercing pain shot through me, and I slowly opened my eyes. 3 years ago, Anna and I were talking about marriage. I was caught up in the joy of becoming her husband when an unexpected accident occurred. I had happened to see Makoto being beaten by his girlfriend's lover, so I stepped in to help him. He was extremely grateful, but he still pestered every day, begging for his unfaithful girlfriend to take him back. In the end, his girlfriend's lover blamed me for everything, ambushed me on my way to work, and set up a revenge plot. The night before the wedding, I was left in a pool of blood in an alley, and fell into a coma. I became a vegetative state patient, lay unconscious for 3 long years. "Mr. Wong, you're finally awake." The familiar sound of crying reached my ears. I opened my eyes and saw the butler, tearfully gazing at me, frantically pressing the nurse's call button. She said, Doctor, Mr. Wong is awake." The butler grasped my hand and cried with joy, "Mr. Wong, you're awake. I'll go tell Miss Lee right away." You have no idea. In these 3 years, Miss Lee became a shadow of herself. She almost couldn't go on living. Miss Lee stayed by your side every day, making sure you received the best treatment. She took care of your every need, never once letting anyone else handle it. I knew Anna loved me deeply. If not for that accident 3 years ago, we would have already been married. Hearing the butler's words, the confusion and fear from just waking up started to fade away. I leaned back against the headboard, my voice still weak, and asked, "Butler, where's Anna?" She had been with me day and night. Why was she not here the moment I woke up? The butler's expression grew complicated, and she fell silent for a long time before speaking. Just as I was starting to worry something had happened to Anna, the butler sighed and said, "It's all that useless Makoto's fault." Miss Lee went to handle his mess. She kept grumbling about Makoto. "Miss Lee hates that man more than anyone. If it weren't for him, you wouldn't have ended up in a coma. Over the years, he's caused so many problems for Miss Lee, and it's the Lee family that had to clean up after him. She absolutely loathes him. She gets disgusted just by seeing him." Chapter 2. I fell silent after hearing all of this. If Anna truly hated someone, would she repeatedly help him over and over again? Everyone said she loved me deeply, and I believed it. But on the day I woke up, at such a crucial moment, she was by Makoto's side, the men she supposedly despised most. I shook my head, dismissing this absurd thought from my mind. Perhaps she didn't expect me to wake up today, I told myself that. Someone asked, "How do you feel?" A clear, cold voice came from above, and when I looked up, I met a pair of brown, watery eyes. Those eyes were pure and clear, like the spring water of a bottomless pond. I shook my head and hoarsely replied, "I'm fine, thank you, sis." The woman froze for a moment. She was wearing a white lab coat, though it couldn't hide her graceful figure. Her beautiful face, partially hidden by a mask, was sculpted as finely as a painting, clean and sharp. Her name was Willow, Anna's cousin. I had heard that she had no interest in getting involved with the Liu family affairs and was focused on her medical career. After I became a vegetable, I had been under her care in the hospital she worked at. She said, "There's nothing wrong from the checkups so far. You just need to rest. If you have any issues, make sure to come back to the hospital for further checks." Willow removed her mask and frowned as she asked, "Where's Anna?" Before I could answer, the butler interjected, "It's that Makoto again. He's always causing trouble for Miss Lee. These years, Miss Lee has been cleaning up his mess, sometimes even neglecting Mr. Wong because of it. That man is a useless burden, good for nothing." Without thinking, I instinctively replied, "Anna went there willingly." Both of them glanced at me in surprise, especially Willow. Her eyes filled with meaning. The atmosphere turned awkward for a moment. The butler seemed to realize her mistake and cautiously looked at me. She said, "Mr. Wong, please don't be upset." I spoke without thinking. Miss Lee cares about you the most. If it wasn't for you saving Makoto back then, she wouldn't have bothered with him at all. Miss Lee hates him. She gets disgusted just by seeing him. I took a deep breath to calm myself, and said, it's fine. I didn't think too much about it. I told myself I was probably overthinking things. After all, I knew best how Anna felt about me. She would even sacrifice her life for me. Over these 3 years, she had never left my side, and had never once given up on me. Why should I doubt that? After my checkups, it was already an hour later. It wasn't until 9 in the evening that Anna finally burst through the door. George. She called my name, appearing at the door in a black dress that made her look slender and enchanting. She was still the same as 3 years ago, yet she seemed more mature now. I smiled and looked at her carefully, saying, Anna, these 3 years, you've worked hard. For these 3 years, she had stayed by my side, giving everything for me, worrying endlessly. It showed. Her once delicate face now carried traces of exhaustion and weariness. Anna no longer held back. With red eyes, she rushed into my arms. George, never leave me again. Though her strength was small, she held me tightly, almost painfully so. She whispered, we'll get married soon. I never want to lose you. Her voice was raspy, like a vow she was making, speaking directly into my ear. I couldn't help but feel moved. Just as I was about to respond, I looked up and saw a man standing at the corner by the door. His face was full of sorrow and pain. As he gazed longingly at Anna's back, his eyes filled with a mixture of emotions. If I wasn't mistaken, he was the man I saved 3 years ago, Makoto. Chapter 3. When I didn't say anything, Anna's brows furrowed slightly. It was as if she had a premonition. Following my gaze, she saw Makoto standing at the door. In that moment, I felt her trembling arm tighten around mine. Suddenly, with an intensity one hadn't felt before. Unlike the tender affection she'd shown earlier, her embrace became stiff and rigid. It wasn't until I spoke, asking, Anna, what's wrong? That she seemed to snap out of it, letting go of me and saying, sorry. She lowered her head, her eyes full of apology, her voice laced with concern as she checked on my condition. George, it's all my fault. I've been too reckless. The butler, standing by, chimed in. Miss Lee is just very emotional. You've been asleep for 3 years, and now that you've finally woken up, she's afraid you might disappear again. I asked, really? I looked up and gave a faint smile, locking eyes with Anna. She gazed back at me, her usually proud eyes now filled with nothing but affection for me. What nonsense. Of course it's true. In that moment, her eyes were only for me. But in the brief moment of distraction earlier, who was she thinking about? Makoto, aware that we had noticed him, hesitated for a moment before walking in. He said, Mr. Wong, you're awake. That's great. He smiled at me, but his expression was hesitant, as though he respected and feared me at the same time. Anna furrowed her brow and impatiently said, I told you to go home. Why are you still here? Makoto stood there without explaining himself, merely offering a polite smile. Just like 3 years ago, when I had first met him, weak and reserved, polite and well-mannered. I spoke softly, it's okay, sit down. Anna, however, was still wearing a dark expression, clearly displeased with his presence. Makoto didn't dare say much, standing awkwardly in place. I sighed helplessly and looked at Anna. He hasn't done anything wrong. Don't treat him like this. Anna's tone was cold. He knows he can't do anything right, yet he still tries to act like he's useful. What's the point of him being here? All he does is annoy people. The butler, unable to remain silent, added, Miss Lee is right, Mr. Ito. You really cause trouble wherever you go. It's best you just stay away from now on. You're bad luck. But before I could respond, Anna shot the butler a cold look and said, since when did it become your place to speak? Not just the butler. Even I was stunned. The butler had been by my side for years, taking care of me, and Anna had always treated her with respect. She had never spoken to her so harshly before. I furrowed my brows, feeling a bit troubled. Was it just my imagination, or was there something odd going on here? While Anna clearly showed her dislike for Makoto, she only allowed herself to scold him. If anyone else dared to say anything about him, she would immediately step in to defend him. I said, Anna, the butler shouldn't have spoken like that about Mr. Ito. I'll apologize to him on her behalf. Anna seemed to snap back to her senses, and for a moment, I saw a flash of panic in her eyes. She quickly said, George, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. Her gaze darkened as she glanced at Makoto with a hint of distaste. Can't you just leave already? Are you planning to keep interrupting us? Makoto's eyes reddened, but he held back the tears and said in a hoarse voice, I just wanted to make sure Mr. Wong is all right, and thank him in person. Mr. Wong, thank you for saving me that time. I responded, it's nothing. I gave a nonchalant smile. That woman hasn't bothered you again, has she? Makoto smiled faintly. Thanks to Miss Lee, she hasn't come to trouble me in a long time. Anna's expression darkened again. If you're stupid enough to keep in touch with her, even if she has someone beat you to death, I won't bother to collect your body. Makoto's face became even more timid, and he stammered, I won't do that anymore. The heavy feeling in my chest only grew. Was I overthinking this? Why? When Anna clearly showed her disdain for Makoto, did I feel like there was an atmosphere between them that I couldn't quite grasp? Chapter 4. After everyone else had left, the hospital room was left with only Anna and me. Unlike the cold, distant demeanor she displayed in front of others, she was always warm and indulgent with me. She said, George, now that you've woken up, don't leave me again. When she gazed at me with such deep affection, the strange feeling I had noticed earlier between her and Makoto slowly faded away. I couldn't help but wonder, had I overthought it earlier? After all, the gentle eyes she was looking at me with now couldn't lie, nor could they deceive me. I knew what it felt like when she loved me, so I was sure that she still loved me, just as much as before. I replied, all right, I won't be so impulsive again. I suppressed the unease in my heart and pulled her into my arms. At the Shimizu Bay Villa, the car stopped at the gate, and Anna opened the door to help me out. I frowned and said, there's no need for this. I can walk on my own. But Anna stubbornly insisted. 3 years ago, when I let go for just a moment, you left me for 3 whole years. This time, I won't let go of you, no matter what. My heart ached, and I couldn't help but caress her cheek. Yes, she had waited for me for 3 long years. Anna turned her head and kissed my fingers gently. George, I'm going to marry you. I can't wait anymore. Tomorrow, I'll announce it to City A. The wedding will continue. The night air was soft, with the shadows of trees swaying in the breeze. I never expected the wedding room from 3 years ago to remain unchanged, still looking exactly as it had before the accident. From the decor in the hall, the tall spiral staircase, to the carpets that covered the entire villa, and even the paintings on the walls, nothing had moved an inch. Anna embraced me from behind, her breath soft and alluring. Your golden Nanmu tree has grown so tall. I was pleasantly surprised. The Nanmu garden is still here. That garden was something I had planted myself 3 years ago, marking the beginning of our life together as a married couple. She answered, of course. She brushed aside her hair, her expression serious as she said, every day, I come here to take care of it, because I know that when you wake up, you won't want to see a barren garden. I was deeply touched. Despite dealing with the company and accompanying me during my years in a coma, she still found time to tend to the garden I had planted for us. My earlier suspicions about her and Makoto now seemed utterly ridiculous. I said, Anna, I'll never leave you again. Her breathing became erratic, and she couldn't help herself as she leaned in to kiss me. Anna. A startled cry broke through the moment, and Anna froze, her movement stopping abruptly. We both tensed up and looked towards the sound, but there was nothing to be seen. I frowned. It seems to be coming from the backyard. Do you think something happened with the house staff? Anna's expression darkened, but there was no surprise in her reaction. She said, wait here. I'll handle it and be right back. With that, she gave me a stern look and strode toward the backyard. I followed her, confused. The cry had sounded like it came from the Nanmu garden. Through the trees, I saw a familiar figure struggling, desperately calling for help. It was Makoto. He had gotten tangled in the vines of the Nanmu tree and was struggling helplessly, his arms scratched and bleeding. Anna's face turned pale as she rushed over and yanked him out of the vines. She scolded him. You fool, who told you to come here? Makoto straightened up, shrinking back in shame. His voice was full of guilt as he said, sorry, I just wanted to help take care of Mr. Wang's Nanmu garden. Anna's face shifted, but she was still visibly upset. Coldly, she said, how many times have I told you? I don't need you doing these things. All you're doing is getting hurt and making a mess. Makoto, stubborn as always, retorted, but I just want to repay Mr. Wang. What does this have to do with you? Then, looking at me with guilt, he said, Mr. Wang, I'm sorry. I didn't want to disturb you. I can never repay your kindness, but I wanted to do what I could, even if it's just little things like this. I walked over and spoke softly. It's all right, as long as you're okay. But Anna was still furious, looking at Makoto with disdain. You can't do anything right. Just stay out of the way and stop causing trouble for others. Though her words were harsh, I couldn't ignore the way she kept her gaze fixed on the wound on Makoto's arm. The warmth in my heart suddenly turned cold. Perhaps others wouldn't notice, but I could see it clearly. Anna was worried about him. Chapter 5. Makoto shrank away and ran off. Anna's words had been harsh, and he couldn't bear them. Even a man as humble as he could only tolerate so much before his self-respect was chipped away. My voice had grown colder, and I said, it's late. Let's go back. Anna, still lost in thought, stared darkly at the direction Makoto had left. Her eyes filled with disgust, yet her expression was distant. I knew it. She was worried about him. I called her name. Anna. I raised my voice slightly, my tone growing more indifferent. Only then did Anna snap out of her daze. She looked at me apologetically and said, sorry. He damaged your Nanmu garden. I'll make it up to you. She thought I was upset because Makoto had clumsily ruined the garden. I gave a faint smile, but it lacked warmth. It's all right, Anna. If someone else has touched the Nanmu, there's no need to be upset. Just don't worry about it. Her face stiffened for a moment, and I slowly withdrew my hand, looking at her seriously. Anna, you know me. I'm always stubborn. If what you give me is the same as what you give to others, I'd rather not have it. I was the kind of person who only liked things that were uniquely mine. I didn't want love that was shared between others. I wanted a deep, exclusive bond. Anna's face darkened briefly, but she immediately tightened her embrace around me. Her voice was hoarse as she whispered, "I'll always be yours," I replied. "All right," and I returned the embrace. I had been in a coma for 3 years. In those 3 years, so much had happened. For example, during these 3 years, Anna had handled countless messes caused by Makoto. Makoto, however, seemed grateful for her help. He wanted to repay the kindness she had shown me, but he kept messing things up. Every time he did, Anna would silently cover for him. Everyone said that Anna disliked Makoto. Even Anna herself believed that, once telling me, "What a foolish man. I don't understand why you saved him back then. You wasted 3 years of your life for nothing." I smiled at her and said, "If I hadn't saved him, he would have been beaten to death. Could you have borne that?" Anna froze, immediately tightening her hold on me. "What are you talking about?" She kissed me playfully and said, "How can he compare to you, George? Tomorrow we're getting married. I can finally be yours." She seemed to be reflecting, or perhaps feeling content as she said, "From tomorrow on, you'll be my legal husband." I wanted to believe her. The way she loved me now felt the same as before, unchanged. But something was different. The woman who had always been cold and distant, never showing her emotions in front of others, had shown uncontainable feelings when dealing with Makoto. Even if it was just annoyance or impatience, Makoto had become a special case in her heart. The wedding day arrived. This wedding had been delayed for 3 years, but all the details had been prepared, so everything proceeded smoothly. Anna stood before me, more beautiful than ever. We stood facing each other on the stage, and below, our family and friends filled the seats. This grand wedding had mobilized nearly half of City A's resources and was even being streamed live across the city. But with so many people around, it felt like Anna could only see me. The officiant asked, "Miss Lee, do you take Mr. Wang as your lawful husband, for better or for worse, in sickness and health, till death do you part?" Her eyes reddened as she was about to reply, but suddenly, a harsh noise came from the broadcast, followed by a man's desperate cry, "Anna, help me." It was Makoto's voice. Anna's face immediately changed. "Makoto, what's happened?" The voice on the other end answered, "Anna, help me, that woman's back. She brought a group of people and said they're going to kill me." The signal was quickly cut off, replaced by the sound of a woman's arrogant voice. The woman said, "Anna, come here now and bring the ransom. Otherwise, you'll never see Makoto again." Anna was in a complete panic. Without thinking, she reached to take off her wedding ring. I grabbed her hand and asked, "Anna, what are you going to do?" She looked at me with guilt and said, "I'm sorry. I have to go save Makoto. He's honest and naive. If I don't help him, he'll really die." I took a deep breath, fighting to suppress my anger. "This is something the police can handle. Even if you go, it won't make a big difference. Do you still want to go?" She hesitated for a moment before replying, "He only trusts me. If I don't go, he'll be terrified." I had to face the fact that she was no longer the person I thought she was. I forced myself to stay calm and asked, "Anna, even if you go to save him and it brings shame to me, ruins my reputation in City A, and makes my family a laughing stock, will you still leave me and go to him?" This time, she didn't even hesitate. She said, "I'm sorry, George. I'll make it up to you. The man I've always wanted to marry is you, and only you. I'll be back soon." I slowly clenched my fists, my gaze growing cold. "Anna, think carefully. If you go, the wedding is cancelled immediately." Chapter 6. She hesitated for just a moment. In front of so many eyes, she turned and left without hesitation. The reporters swarmed in, and within a day, the news of Anna running away from the wedding would spread throughout a city. As the groom who had been abandoned, the one left on stage, I was bound to become the subject of everyone's gossip. I stood there, watching her figure recede into the distance. The flashbulbs that had been prepared for me turned into daggers, each one piercing through me. I was exposed to the crowd's gaze, with nowhere to hide. The blade that symbolized being publicly abandoned by the bride fell straight down, cutting me, leaving me drenched in blood, my flesh torn apart. Guests around me began murmuring. The bride actually ran away from the wedding on the spot. What happened? Weren't they supposed to be a golden couple? One person muttered, "Anna used to love George so much. I even envied him. But now it looks like she's fallen out of love." Even if she's fallen out of love, it shouldn't be like this. She just ran off, leaving George standing alone on the stage. This is too much. I'm curious. Who is the person so important that a woman who loved George so deeply would leave him at the altar? The voices were chaotic, all discussing my situation. My back turned cold, as if I had fallen into an ice cellar. Those gazes on me were a mix of schadenfreude and pity. Some people shaking their heads in disbelief, looking at me as though I were the most pitiful person. Someone said, I used to envy George, even after becoming a vegetable. Anna never left his side. She took care of him for 3 whole years, never looking at another man, and now she's with someone else. Another person replied, I heard that man is the one George saved back then. After George became a vegetable, that man was often around Anna, and little by little, they became close. Someone else sighed, to be honest, Anna should have just found a man unrelated to all this. She didn't have to stick a knife into George's heart like this. I wonder if George regrets saving that Makoto now. My father's face turned ashen with fury. He stormed onto the stage, grabbing my arm and saying, Let's go, George, we won't stand for this. He had always been fond of Anna as a daughter-in-law, but now, his eyes were red with anger. He gritted his teeth and said, I, Martin's son, can't take this humiliation. Anna's parents stood up as well, apologizing to me. George, we're so sorry. This is Anna's fault, and I'm here to apologize on her behalf. Lee's mother looked at my parents with a pained expression. This is all Anna's fault. The Lee family won't shirk responsibility. But, considering that Anna has taken care of George all these years, could you give her a chance? Lee's father spoke with authority. Anna does have George in her heart. If not, she wouldn't have sworn to come back and honor the marriage contract. She wouldn't have made George wait for her. I believe she has her own reasons, my father said. What kind of reason could there be that would make her abandon my son in front of everyone? His face was grim, refusing to accept their excuses. We all heard it just now. That man called her for help, but she's not a police officer. Nor is she anything to Makoto. She's just his benefactor's fiancée. What right does she have to leave George and go to him? My father's words stunned the room into silence. It was as if they suddenly remembered why I had become a vegetable, because I had saved Makoto. But they hadn't expected that years later, my wedding would be once again put on hold. All because of him. Lee's mother couldn't keep up the act anymore. We've already apologized for Anna. The full story, we'll have to wait for her to come back and explain. I shook my head and interrupted her. No need to explain, I said, stepping in front of my father, blocking her from speaking. A few years ago, I had acted on impulse and put myself in danger. I had only thought about fulfilling my own sense of goodness, forgetting that I also had a family to care for. Now, standing behind my father, seeing his hair beginning to turn gray, a wave of emotion surged in my heart. It was time for me to stand on my own. I quickly gathered my thoughts and said with determination, I made myself clear just now. If Anna takes one more step, the wedding will be cancelled. Chapter 7. The entire room was in an uproar. The Lee family's parents looked extremely displeased, with Lee's father directly scolding me. What are you doing, George? You two have been engaged for so long. How can you just cancel the wedding? Everyone's watching. You can't just act recklessly. I sneered and said, the one who abandoned me and ran away from the wedding in front of everyone isn't being reckless, and you're accusing me of being reckless. I understand people protect their own, but this is taking it too far. Lee's mother, who had intended to reprimand me, paused for a moment, her eyes suddenly turning red. George, it's not that we don't want to speak up for you, but the situation is urgent, and we're truly distressed. She wiped her tears and said, you know she's a kind-hearted child. Otherwise, she wouldn't have waited for you all these years. Even when you became a vegetable, she never left you. Her wanting to save Makoto is only natural. Lee's father immediately understood her meaning. Exchanging a glance with her, he said, your mother is right. The most important thing now is to ensure Anna and Makoto's safety. Makoto said he was kidnapped on the phone, and Anna is rushing to save him. As Anna's fiancé, your first reaction isn't to worry about her safety but to cancel the engagement. Does that honor the 3 years she's taken care of you? As expected from a businessman with a smooth facade, he initially referred to Lee's mother as my mother, treating me like part of their family, but quickly slapped me with a warning, telling me I shouldn't be acting recklessly but should be concerned about Anna's physical safety. I sneered. First of all, the wedding isn't finished, so I'm not connected to the Lee family. Anna's mother is not my mother. Secondly, matters like kidnapping should be handled by professional police, not us. Staying out of the way and providing effective evidence is the wisest choice. Anna has bodyguards with her, and she's leaving from the wedding venue. Unless she puts herself at risk, her bodyguards won't let anything happen to her. If she's really seeking death, you two would have stopped her long ago, right? The Wang family's parents immediately fell silent, their faces turning dark. I spoke with a calm, indifferent expression. Finally, Anna's impulsiveness is nothing more than the fact that her concern for Makoto has clouded her judgment. This is her choice. She chose to risk herself for love. What else can I say? The two of them fell silent, not a word escaping their mouths. I turned around, but Lee's father quietly called after me. George, think carefully. If the wedding is cancelled, wouldn't the cooperation between the Wang and Lee families be cancelled too? For the Lee family, it's just a financial loss, but for your declining Wang family, it would be a devastating blow. Lee's mother, too, spoke with a serious face. While we're still willing to give you face and find a way to let this go, George, you should understand how important this wedding is. Finally, they dropped the pretense, showing their true, hypocritical faces. Compared to their daughter and the interests of the Lee family, what was the humiliation I was enduring? My father's eyes were red with anger. He shouted, "The Wang family hasn't fallen so low that we have to sacrifice my son's dignity to make a profit. Even if it's a devastating blow, I will not let anyone make a joke out of George." I took a deep breath, walked up to my father, and said, "Dad, they're right. The wedding can't be cancelled." My father's expression changed, full of disagreement. I shook my head, signaling him to trust me, and then I looked down at the crowd. The venue was packed, all eyes on us. Although the wedding was grand and our relationship had been the envy of others, she had run away in front of so many people, making me the laughing stock of all. This was the proof of a woman's change of heart. I let out a self-deprecating smile, my eyes locking onto one figure in the crowd. All the gazes on me were either filled with pity, mockery, or disdain, but she remained indifferent, her eyes betraying no emotion. It was Anna's cousin, Willow, the most distinguished woman in the room. I walked up to her, speaking calmly. The wedding continues. Chapter 8. Willow slightly raised her eyes and glanced at me, her voice laced with confusion. "What is it?" While everyone else was in shock, she remained composed, her demeanor as cold as ever. I looked into her eyes and asked, "Willow, would you marry me?" Willow sat there calmly, as though she had already predicted the turn of events. She raised an eyebrow, giving me a half-smile as she said, "Think carefully. I am Anna's sister." Only then did the crowd snap back to reality, looking at me with stunned, disbelieving eyes. Lee's father was practically seething with rage. "George, are you out of your mind?" Lee's mother was equally shocked. She said, "I know you're upset about Anna running away from the wedding, but you can't just pick some woman and marry her on a whim." I smiled faintly and said, "Of course, I'm not just picking any woman. Anna's sister is the best woman for me." Lee's father growled, "You still remember she's your sister? Shameless." Even my father looked at me in disbelief. He said, "George, I understand you're angry. If you want to cancel the wedding, I'll absolutely support you, but..." He trailed off, casting a complicated glance at Willow. Willow was indeed Anna's sister, but she wasn't much older, only a few months older than Anna, and she was 5 years younger than me. The Lee family was the most powerful family in a city. The patriarch, Mr. Lee, had many children, over a dozen. In fact, Anna's father was the fifth-born son, yet Anna was his eldest daughter. Many people thought Anna would inherit the family business one day, but unexpectedly, Mr. Lee's most beloved grandchild turned out to be Willow, the granddaughter he had just found in her 50s. Her father had been Mr. Lee's first child with his original wife, but he tragically passed away young, and Mr. Lee had never quite gotten over it. What no one expected was that this late-blooming son of his had left behind a daughter, Willow. She had been raised by her grandmother, and despite being part of the Lee family by blood, she had not been in their orbit for much of her life. Anna's father, Lee's fifth son, had fought his way through fierce competition with his brothers to claim his share of the family fortune. He had always felt that it was not enough and needed more to satisfy his ambitions. Mr. Lee didn't like the idea of one family becoming too powerful, so he had kept the fifth son's family in check. No one could have predicted that this very family would later bring forth Anna, his highly capable and diligent granddaughter, who, even before reaching adulthood, had been involved in managing the family's affairs. Despite Mr. Lee's reluctance to relinquish power, he had to start favoring Anna and her father with their help. Then, at a critical moment, Willow had been officially recognized and brought back into the Lee family. Her return signaled a major shift in the Lee family's internal dynamics, but no one expected that Willow would be revealed to be Mr. Lee's true eldest granddaughter. Mr. Lee, in his earlier years, had been known for his womanizing ways. It was said that before building his empire, he had married his first wife, Willow's grandmother, but, like many men who became successful, he eventually abandoned her as he grew wealthier. Their eldest son, who died young, had always been a lingering regret for Mr. Lee. Years later, in his old age, Mr. Lee had reunited with his original wife, and much to everyone's surprise, they had a child, Willow. Even though Willow was only a few months older than Anna, she was now considered the rightful heir. At first, everyone had assumed Willow was Mr. Lee's illegitimate daughter from an affair, but when her father's identity came to light, all the rumors fell silent. Though Willow was brought back into the Lee family, she still carried her grandmother's surname. Lee's fifth son, Anna's father, was strongly opposed to this. He had been on the verge of consolidating all the family wealth, and now, with Willow suddenly appearing, He saw her as a rival for the inheritance. He considered her a thorn in his side. He said, "Father, even if she's the child of my late older brother, what does she have to do with the Lee family? She may share your blood, but she doesn't even bear the Lee surname. Why should she inherit the Liu family's fortune?" Mr. Lee had snapped. "Shut up, you ungrateful son." The answer had come in the form of a resounding slap from Mr. Lee. "Even if she doesn't bear the Lee surname, she's still my flesh and blood. Why doesn't she have the right to inherit my fortune? I'm not dead yet, and here you are, eyeing my wealth. Don't you see me as your father anymore?" With that, Mr. Lee had exploded in fury, and Lee's fifth son had no choice but to back down. But, of course, he was unwilling to share what he had considered to be rightfully his. The two families had already clashed numerous times in both subtle and overt ways. Willow's attendance at Anna's wedding was merely an act to maintain appearances, to keep Mr. Lee from losing face in front of the public. My father sighed heavily and pulled me aside, speaking in a low voice. "Even if you're angry, you can't drag Willow into this. You know her relationship with the Lee family is complicated." I cut him off. "Father, you heard them earlier. We can't back out of the marriage." I lifted my head, looking directly at the couple standing in front of me, and said firmly, "For our Wang family, backing out of the marriage would be a devastating blow. We can only secure our business by marrying into the Lee family, but who we marry is none of their business." Chapter 9. Before I could finish speaking, Lee's father directly interrupted me. "George, you know that it's the Wang family who needs this marriage. It's not Anna begging you to marry her. It's you who needs her to marry you. Since you know what's at stake, stop acting petty and talking about canceling the wedding just because you're angry with Anna." Lee's mother stepped forward. What had started as an apology now turned into impatience. She said, "George, we've been kind to you, saying that Anna has given so much of herself over the years to care for you. Even when you were in a coma, she's already promised to come back and marry you. So why are you fixating on this small matter of her running away?" I couldn't help but laugh. "So now Anna running away from the wedding is somehow my fault." I paused and continued, "You're right. I never intended to cancel the engagement." The expressions on their faces softened, and they were about to speak when I looked directly at Willow and said, "The Lee family isn't limited to only Anna when it comes to marriage alliances." I took a step forward, locking eyes with Willow. "Willow, you still haven't answered my question. Will you marry me?" A deathly silence enveloped the room. No one had expected me to be serious. "George." Once the realization hit, Lee's father shouted angrily, "You said those outrageous words in the heat of the moment, and I let it slide. But if you really want to humiliate the Lee family, don't blame me when I turn my back on you." I didn't look at him but instead kept my gaze fixed on Willow. Lee's mother pulled at Lee's father's arm, casting a contemptuous look at me. "Let him continue. Willow is above such things. She never interacts with men, especially not in this kind of setting. Do you really think she'll agree to marry him? All he's doing is making a fool of himself in front of everyone." But before she could finish speaking, a voice interrupted her. "All right, I'll marry you." Lee's mother had barely spoken when Willow coolly cut her off, her gaze directed at me with a half smile. Her eyes, usually so mesmerizing, held an unmistakable coldness, giving her an air of both passion and indifference. I saw Lee's father and Lee's mother's faces turn ashen. They looked utterly stunned, their expressions frozen in shock. Yet they dared not speak up. They only stared at Willow, asking, "Willow, what does this mean?" Willow calmly replied, "It means nothing." She looked at me, her lips curling into a faint smile. "Didn't you say we're getting married? Well, aren't you going to come over?" I let out a silent sigh of relief, walking up to her side and taking her hand. "Then, I look forward to working with you, Willow," I said softly, speaking into her ear. Willow glanced at me, her expression unreadable. She let out a soft laugh and said, "You sure are bold. Aren't you afraid I'll reject you?" This was a risky move on my part. If Willow rejected me, I would become the laughingstock of the entire room. I didn't speak, but only I knew how nervous I really was. My palms were sweating, though I had to maintain a calm exterior. I said, "But you've agreed, haven't you?" She seemed to see through my facade and didn't say anything more. Instead, she looked into my eyes and said slowly, "Since there's already a wedding prepared, why don't we go ahead and marry now? What do you think?" Once again, the room fell into complete silence. I could see that Lee's father and Lee's mother looked as though they had been struck by lightning, their faces ashen with fury. Yet, strangely, I felt a sense of satisfaction. I took Willow's hand. She stood up, her white dress as pure and beautiful as the moon, standing by my side, looking every bit the bride. I looked into her eyes and, for the first time in what felt like forever, I finally exhaled in relief as we walked up to the stage. Before we reached the stage, she lowered her head and whispered in my ear, "You knew I would agree, didn't you?" Chapter 10. I froze for a moment and instinctively looked at her, but Willow merely withdrew her gaze and stood in the center of the stage. I gathered my thoughts, forcing a smile as I looked out at the guests. The wedding continued, just as Lee's mother and father had said. Even though Anna ran away, The wedding had to go on. The Wang family still needed this marriage to maintain our already precarious position. I had been in a coma for 3 years, and perhaps to many people, I was just an absolute failure. But starting today, I had to make them realize that even with 3 years of blank space, it didn't change the fact that I was still George. All the vows that I had originally planned to give to Anna, I now gave to another woman. In front of everyone, we exchanged rings. The officiant awkwardly asked, "Mr. Wang, do you take Willow to be your lawfully wedded wife, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, forsaking all others, until death do you part?" "I do," I answered without hesitation. The officiant wiped the sweat off his brow, as if he had never witnessed such a scene. Not only had the bride run away, but the groom had also swapped the bride right then and there. He continued, "Miss Liu, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, forsaking all others, until death do you part?" Willow looked into my eyes, as if trying to peer into the very depths of my soul. She gently grasped my hand, watching me slip the ring onto her finger. Only then did she respond with her soft, cold voice, "I do." Li's parents couldn't bear to watch any longer and stood up, leaving with stern faces. This absurd wedding had kept most of the guests there to the end. Despite their extreme displeasure, they could only maintain a semblance of civility for the sake of Li's grandfather. After all, Willow was now the most popular candidate to inherit the Li family fortune. From the initial shock to the eventual acceptance, my father looked at me with a hint of admiration. He said, "George, that was a huge risk." After the wedding, my father found me and said, "The Wang family has regained some face, but have you thought about what would have happened if Willow had rejected you? Your situation would have been even worse." I replied, "Don't worry, Dad, I know my limits." What he didn't know was that, although I was nervous, I wasn't completely gambling. If I hadn't had even a sliver of confidence, I would never have been so reckless. There was a knock on the door. Both my father and I turned to look. Willow was standing there, leaning against the doorframe, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. She said, "Sorry to interrupt." My father cleared his throat and immediately said, "Well, I'll take my leave now." He was considerate enough to give us some space. As he passed by Willow, he nodded in greeting. To our surprise, Willow casually called out, "Goodbye, Dad." The unexpected address nearly made both my father and I stumble in shock. I stared at her, surprised, but only saw Willow calmly sending my father off. Before leaving, my father glanced at me, as if he wanted to say something, but after another glance at Willow, he said nothing and left quickly. I walked behind Willow, thinking for a moment before softly saying, "Thank you for what you did at the wedding." She didn't turn around. With her back to me, she said coldly, "Didn't you say you knew your limits? What are you thanking me for?" Her voice was distant, as if she wanted to establish a clear boundary between us. Chapter 11. I furrowed my brow. It seemed that Willow had overheard my conversation with my father earlier. She turned to face me and said, "But you really do have a lot of courage. You didn't think about the consequences at all." I met her gaze and clenched my fist, thinking about our current situation. I exhaled and said, "I heard what you said to Li's grandfather that day. We were now married. No matter how we got here, we were both in the same boat. I thought it was my duty to be honest with her." Sure enough, she raised her eyebrows slightly, signaling for me to continue. I said, "Li's grandfather originally intended for you to marry me." She lifted an eyebrow in interest, prompting me to go on. I continued, "The outside world thinks that Li's grandfather would marry his heir to one of the prominent families to strengthen the Li family's power. That's why Anna and I were never seen as a good match. Her family even hoped that I'd never wake up, so they could choose a son-in-law who Li's grandfather would approve of. But Anna insisted on marrying me, shutting down their hopes, thinking that she would gain the upper hand in the battle for inheritance." Her expression grew serious, and I continued, "But the truth is, Li's grandfather never intended for his heir to marry into those so-called prestigious families. That would only dilute the Li family's power and influence. He always wanted you to marry into the Wang family. To marry me, the Li family would have much more peace of mind, even without a lot of outside help. A family like the Li's doesn't really need that. It's just that the children of the family, desperate for power, want to unite with outside forces to divide up the old man's territory. But he didn't want that, so I was his best choice." When I heard their conversation that day, I was surprised. I didn't realize there were so many layers to this. In fact, the person marrying me was the one most likely to inherit the position. The Wang family, while still a prestigious family, had long since fallen from its peak. If it weren't for the marriage contract with the Li family, we would have been kicked out of the circle a long time ago. We posed no real threat to the Li family's control. But on the other hand, the Wang family was still considered a noble family. Though we were down on our luck, we still had a solid foundation. Our parents were serious about educating their children, and we were definitely a better choice than someone from outside the circle. So, all things considered, I was the best choice. It was because I knew this that I had the courage to walk toward Willow when Anna ran away from the wedding. But at the same time, I was also a little anxious, because I wasn't sure how much Willow craved power. After all, replacing her sister at the wedding and marrying her fiancé was truly a scandalous thing to do. But fortunately, I won the gamble. Sure enough, Willow narrowed her eyes as she looked at me, a playful smile in her gaze. "Looks like I underestimated you," she said. She leaned closer, her cool breath brushing against me. She spoke in a voice that was almost a whisper. "From now on, you're my husband, George." The sudden intimacy made me instinctively take a step back, but Willow didn't let me retreat. I didn't want to hurt her, so I just stood still, letting her get closer. Behind me was the hard wall, and in front of me was her soft, floral scent. I was trapped in this suffocating atmosphere, every inch of me now tinged with her presence. "Willow," I responded awkwardly, "don't push me. I was just an ordinary man, and she happened to be my wife." At that moment, my phone rang. Willow took my phone out in front of me. The screen lit up with Anna's name, and my breath hitched. I suddenly felt a strange, guilty sensation, as though I had been caught in an affair. Chapter 12. When I saw Anna's name, it felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over me, dousing all the heat and emotion that had been running through my body. I would never forget how she had left me at the wedding scene for Makoto, but I also wouldn't forget the 3 years she had spent taking care of me while I was in a coma. She just didn't love me anymore. Or maybe she had fallen for someone else. I couldn't blame her, but I also couldn't forgive her. My hesitation didn't escape Willow's notice. She grasped my hand and brought the phone in front of me. "Answer it," she ordered, her tone cold and firm. I frowned. I don't want to hear her voice right now. Willow pursed her lips, clearly displeased. "Is it that you don't want to, or that you're too afraid?" I frowned further but said nothing. Willow smirked, tapping the screen with her finger and directly answering the call. I widened my eyes, still in shock, as Anna's voice came through. "George, are you there?" My chest tightened as if a storm had suddenly engulfed me. I wasn't ready to face her, but Willow was pushing me to do so. When I looked up, I met Willow's proud gaze. I took a deep breath and forced myself to stay calm. "Anna, what is it?" There was a brief pause, and I could tell from her tone that she had sensed the coldness in my voice. I'm sorry, George. I'll make it up to you. I'll give you a grand wedding to make up for everything." I shook my head. "No need. It really wasn't necessary." "The wedding went on, and I just married someone else," she replied. "Don't be angry with me. I know I was wrong, but Makoto's situation is critical. I didn't want to see him die." Her voice was filled with regret as she continued. "George, I want to marry you. Please wait for me to come back." Before I could respond, I heard Makoto's agonized groan in the background. Anna's voice immediately turned frantic. "George, I'll deal with Makoto first and then come back to you. I promise." With that, she abruptly hung up. Willow asked, "Are you upset?" She leaned closer to me and added, "I don't need a husband who still mourns for another woman." I shook my head and met her gaze. "Not really, but can you give me some time?" she replied, her voice as cold as ever. But there was an undercurrent of something more complicated. "I'll give you 3 months. Marrying you was, indeed, a decision made with benefit in mind, but I'm not planning to divorce." Her tone was frigid, yet there was something layered beneath it. 3 months. Sort out your feelings and devote yourself to me entirely. In a single night, the entire city of A knew that Willow and I had married, except Anna. After Anna ran from the wedding, she hadn't appeared in public again. I heard that she had saved Makoto and dealt with the kidnappers. It turned out that the person who had kidnapped her was the same woman who had betrayed him 3 years ago, his ex-girlfriend. After their breakup, she had been imprisoned, but now, 3 years later, she was out and harassing Makoto again. Makoto couldn't take it anymore and turned to Anna for help, and she had assisted him multiple times. Perhaps their bond had deepened in this back and forth. And even Anna herself hadn't realized that she had already fallen in love with Makoto. She just couldn't bring herself to break her promise to me. She had said she would come back and marry me after handling things with Makoto. But the truth was, she stayed by his side for a full 7 days, taking care of him at the hospital, helping him recover and adjust. Not once did she stop to think about what might happen to me after I was left at the altar. Nor did she spare any time to check in on me, even for a moment. While she was with Makoto, I was already a distant memory. Chapter 13. A week was enough for me to adjust my mindset. I had moved into the wedding house with Willow. The Lee family practically lived in one massive estate, occupying an area so vast it was almost overwhelming. I had initially thought she would be living with her family, but it turned out Willow had already established her own home. At first, I was worried that if I stayed with the Lee family, I would eventually run into Anna. There would be too many awkward encounters. But now, that concern was no longer an issue. In the beginning, everyone had been eager to watch me suffer. They wanted to see how I, a man who had awoken from a 3-year coma, would cope after being abandoned by Anna. But now, all eyes were on Anna, waiting to see how she would react. Finally, on the 8th day, when Anna returned after dealing with Makoto's situation, she discovered that the wedding had continued, only the bride had changed. For these past few days, Willow and I had been sleeping in separate rooms. That night, Willow suddenly knocked on my door. "What is it?" I asked, watching her. She entered without a word, closed the door behind her, and said, "Anna's back. You know that, right?" My expression shifted slightly, and I replied, "Of course, I know." My good friends in the circle had already sent me various messages. Some were genuinely concerned about me, while others just wanted to see the spectacle. Anna's return was, of course, the first thing everyone told me. She asked, "What are you thinking?" Her eyes fixed on mine. I shook my head. "What's there to think about? It's already done. Anna and I are a thing of the past. To me, she's just my wife's sister now." My words seemed to please Willow unexpectedly. Her eyes softened, and she said, "Good. You understand your situation. Our position is unique. From now on, I want you to get my approval before meeting her. Of course, it's best if you never see her again." She appeared calm, but I could sense the undercurrent of tension hidden beneath her serene gaze. That night, she fell asleep in my arms. I held her stiffly, afraid to move, not daring to disrupt the stillness until, just before I was about to fall asleep, I heard her whisper in my ear, "It's okay if you can't sleep now. Tomorrow, you can sleep on the plane." I frowned and asked, "Where are we going tomorrow?" She replied, "Of course, we're going on our honeymoon." She nuzzled against me. Oddly enough, I fell asleep just like that. When I woke up the next morning, she was already dressed and had packed everything. She said, "Let's go, my Mr. Wong." I thought it was just a regular honeymoon trip, but when we reached downstairs and saw Anna's car, I glanced at Willow in surprise. As soon as she saw us, Anna opened the car door and stepped out. "George," she called my name, and her voice was full of urgency. Willow and I were already in the car, ready to head off on our honeymoon. Suddenly, Willow angrily grabbed my arm. "You're not going to see her. What did you promise me yesterday?" "Don't go." I asked, "Did you know she was going to come to see me today?" She replied, "Of course." Her voice was cold, but I could hear the suppressed anger beneath it. She added, "George, I can't stand someone who doesn't keep their word. You're not getting out of the car, and you're not going to see her." Though her words were clearly a threat, I could detect a hint of anxiety in her tone. I took a deep breath and said, "Don't worry, I won't go." I didn't want to see her in the first place. I sat still in the car, not moving, while Willow stepped out. The car windows were one-way glass, so I could see outside, but no one could see inside. Anna never knew I was watching her from just a short distance away. Chapter 14. This was the first time I had seen Anna after she had run away from the wedding. She looked much more haggard, her makeup still on, and her clothes were old and wrinkled. I couldn't help but wonder if it was because she had been spending so much time with Makoto, worrying about him so much that she had neglected herself. The next moment, I saw Willow had already walked up to Anna. Willow asked, "What's going on?" Anna shouted, "I need to see George." She grabbed Willow's sleeve, glaring at her intensely, and said, "He promised he would wait for me." Willow replied, "He never said that." Willow grabbed Anna's hand and forcefully pulled it away. Anna demanded, "Tell me, who did he marry?" Her eyes were red as she asked, "Is he just mad at me?" I frowned, realizing that Anna still didn't know that Willow was the one I had married. After all, Willow was her sister, and her parents had likely tried to keep it from her. The whole city knew by now, but it was something they couldn't hide forever. I wasn't sure if Willow would break the news to her right there and then. Willow paused for a few seconds and, unsurprisingly, didn't tell her. She said, "George has married someone else. There's no point in looking for him. He won't have any further relationship with you." Anna retorted, "You're lying. He's just mad at me. I told him I would come back and marry him." Her voice trembled, but she spoke with firm confidence. "We've been through so much together. When he was a vegetable, I took care of him for 3 whole years. He knows I love him. He's just angry that I saved another man." So, she knew. I closed my eyes, feeling an overwhelming sense of mockery. If she already knew, then why did she still abandon me at the wedding? She wasn't wrong, after all. We had so many years of memories, and she took care of me for 3 years without ever giving up on me. Had she been honest with me, telling me she had fallen for someone else, I would have been heartbroken, but I would have let her go. What she shouldn't have done was trample over our family's dignity in front of everyone at the wedding. Willow said, "He won't forgive you. You know his character better than anyone, but from now on, you're not the one who knows him best." Anna still wanted to argue, but Willow had already turned and walked back to the car. She separated me from Anna with the car door, preventing us from even touching. Once inside the car, Willow immediately settled herself into my arms, saying, "If you dare look at her again, you're finished." Her voice was full of threat, but I could clearly sense the underlying tension. I looked at her, confused. "I promise, I won't have anything to do with her. I won't let it affect the union between our families." and I won't embarrass you. But I suddenly pushed her away and straightened my clothes. Do you really need to lecture me like a wife accusing her husband of infidelity? She narrowed her eyes at me, unfazed by my sarcasm. In fact, she nodded slightly, almost approvingly. You're right. So just don't have any contact with her. I felt a surge of impatience and stared out the window, not saying anything more. The car had already started, and Willow seemed determined to stop me from even looking at Anna. The only thing I could do was glance at the rearview mirror, where I saw Anna's familiar figure, growing smaller and smaller as we drove away. From the bottom of my heart, I silently said goodbye. Goodbye, my girl. From now on, we would be strangers. Our honeymoon destination was Las Vegas, which I hadn't expected, I said. I thought you would pick a more casual place to discuss business. Willow glanced at me briefly and replied, how do you know this isn't a business place? Chapter 15. She had booked the presidential suite on the top floor of the hotel, with a breathtaking view of the city below. I had no intention of arguing with her, so I just sat on the large bed. She stood up from her seat by the computer, walked up to me, and placed her hands on either side of me. Her figure was graceful, and she said, it seems our wedding night hasn't really started yet. At her words, I instinctively froze for a moment, looking at her with mixed feelings. Willow leaned closer and said, George, I've already given you time. Don't forget, we're a real couple. I'm not planning on divorcing you, and I'm certainly not going to be a fake wife. I responded, I know. I understood that we wouldn't be a couple in name only, and that eventually, a moment like this would come, but I hadn't expected it to happen so soon. She reached for my shirt, but her movements were awkward, as if trying to hide her own inexperience. I gave a small laugh, seeing through her pretense, and patiently guided her. Her tone was usually sharp, but tonight, it was unbelievably gentle, so gentle it left me feeling a little dazed. The night seemed endless, and as our bodies touched, we became more familiar with each other. This honeymoon was making me feel an increasing closeness to her. Her words echoed in my mind, we are married, a partnership of mutual benefit. You need to trust that I will never do anything to betray you. In comparison to the vague notion of love, I found her words far more convincing. On the day we returned to the country, we got off the plane, and as we reached the airport, I saw a familiar figure, Anna. The moment I laid eyes on her, my expression changed immediately. During our honeymoon, Anna had been trying to contact me nonstop. I was so annoyed that I had changed my phone number, never expecting she would track down my flight. Willow noticed and hurriedly pushed me away, making sure Anna didn't see me. The chauffeur was already waiting outside, and I glanced back at Anna, only to realize there were more people with her. Makoto was there too, his eyes red as he looked at Anna and said, he's already married. Why are you still so obsessed with him? Anna responded, he must be angry with me. She pushed him away, murmuring, he's just upset that I left him to save you. As soon as I explain that the only person I love is him, he'll come back to me. Makoto, still looking pretty healthy, probably because Anna had been taking good care of him these past few days, stood by her side. I turned my gaze away. It was strange, but there was no longer the sharp, agonizing pain in my heart that had once been there. Soon, we arrived back at our new home. It wasn't until we got out of the car that I suddenly realized I was holding Willow's hand. Our relationship had advanced so quickly during this honeymoon, and I cleared my throat, pulling my hand away. Willow looked at me with some concern and asked, are you not feeling well? No, she asked. Then why are you avoiding me? She took my hand again and said, is it because I've asked too much of you during this time? I'm sorry, you just woke up from a coma. I shouldn't have been so thoughtless. I stared at her, speechless. That's not the reason. I shot her a glance. I wasn't sure if she was being deliberately concerned or if she genuinely worried about me. But honestly, even if she asked for more, I could give it. Willow let out a soft laugh, her cheeks unusually tinged with a hint of red. If you're feeling uncomfortable, you need to tell me right away, I replied. I know. Her sudden tenderness made me feel a little out of place. As soon as we got home, my friend called me right away. He asked, do you know Anna's been looking for you like crazy? David, a longtime friend, had been excited when I woke up. He had thought that Anna and I would end up together, but he never imagined things would turn out like this. He couldn't help but curse. She leaves you at the wedding, runs off to save another guy. I really don't get what's going on in her head. If she loved you that much, she should never have done something to hurt you in the first place. Chapter 16. I couldn't help but smile bitterly when I heard about Anna. To be honest, I felt nothing but indifference. I said, she just hasn't realized that the person she loves is Makoto. Her attachment to me is just an obsession, but I don't blame her. After all, she took care of me for 3 years. Once she clears her mind, she won't come looking for me anymore. David responded, is that so? But from the way she's acting, it doesn't seem like it. David immediately fell silent, sighing deeply. George, you don't know how crazy she's been. She searched for you all over City A, Practically turned the entire city upside down. Then, somehow, someone leaked the news that you went on a honeymoon, so she wanted to go abroad too, but her parents stopped her. After a few days of quiet, she started investigating the woman you married, but she couldn't find anything. We saw how insane she was and didn't want to tell her who you married, but it seems like she might have figured it out on her own. It's just a matter of whether she's willing to admit it. I shook my head as I listened. After David sighed and hung up, I noticed the rain had started to fall outside. The light rain soon turned into a downpour, tapping against the glass windows. I stood on the balcony, staring down at the scene below, when I suddenly saw a familiar figure standing there in the rain. It was Anna, standing in the pouring rain, letting herself get drenched. My heart skipped a beat, but my first reaction wasn't pity for her. Instead, it was the realization that she might already know. But then, I couldn't help but laugh bitterly at myself. What was there to worry about? Everyone in the city knew about it. Sooner or later, she would too. I had already prepared myself for this. What was there to feel guilty about? I turned around and saw Willow standing silently behind me, watching me. I expected her to be angry, but she didn't say a word. She just looked at me, and after a long pause, she finally spoke in a cool tone. If you want to go see her, go ahead. I shook my head, answering firmly, I don't want to. As I passed by her, Willow grabbed my sleeve and said, if you're a man, do what you need to do and end it. So that's what she had in mind. For some reason, I suddenly felt a sense of clarity. I looked at her deeply and said, if I go see her now, and she keeps bothering me, what should I do? With me here, she won't dare. Willow replied coldly, her tone certain, with a hint of disdain. She clearly didn't think much of Anna. At the gate of the villa, Anna stood in the pouring rain, blocking the stairs. The iron gate was slick with rain, shining with a strange metallic sheen in the dark, making it look especially ominous. She stood there, drenched, her head lowered, looking like a stray dog with no place to go. I stood at the door, speaking softly, go back. When she saw me, her eyes suddenly lit up, and she instinctively grabbed onto the gate. George, you're finally willing to see me. I didn't move. We stood there across the rain, and I said, you've seen me, now, go back. My voice was so cold that she gradually calmed down. Her dark eyes looked at me, and she said, if you come back with me, I'll leave. I suddenly laughed, a strange reaction in the midst of the heavy rain. I said, you must have heard by now, I'm married. It's not really appropriate for me to go back with you. Her body visibly trembled at my words. I had already noticed she was trying to ignore the fact that I was married, but now that I said it so bluntly, she couldn't keep deceiving herself anymore. George, do you really have to do this to me? Her voice caught, and she choked out, they told me you're with my sister. I didn't want to believe it, but if you wanted to get back at me, this isn't how I thought you would do it. I interrupted her, saying, it's not about getting back at you. It's because she's my best choice. Chapter 17. I looked at her calmly and said, Anna, maybe you've misunderstood. You ran away from the wedding. And yes, I was upset, but I don't harbor any resentment towards you. I know you took care of me for 3 years, and you were kind to my parents as well. So let's call it even. This is the best outcome for both of us, and from now on, we shouldn't meet again. She stared at me, her face crumbling with emotion, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, but I kept my gaze steady, locking eyes with her, and continued, this is the best thing for both of us. Let's not see each other again. It's impossible. She suddenly rushed forward and grabbed my wrist, saying, open the door, let me in. I'll take you with me. I know you're angry with me. I know I was wrong to leave you, but at that time, I had no other choice. I sighed and said, I know you couldn't just watch Makoto die. You were worried about him. You love him. You just don't realize it. I had already decided to shatter her facade, looking at her calmly as I said, don't worry, I'll bless you both. She was on the verge of breaking down, her voice cracking as she said, I don't love him. The person I love is you. George, don't do this to me. I frowned, replying, if you don't love him, why did you choose him without hesitation, leaving me behind? You must know, it wasn't a matter of life or death. There were police, bodyguards, and plenty of professionals. It wasn't your responsibility, yet you still chose to go. It's because he was the one you loved most. Nothing in this world mattered more to you than his safety. You went because you loved him, even if it meant trampling on my dignity and reputation. How is that not love? Her face went pale with every word I said. The person who had once loved me so much now seemed to have transferred her affection. No matter how I felt, enduring this kind of pain was worse than cutting it short. I had already lost 3 years. During those years, I had kept so many people who cared for me and loved me waiting. This time, I couldn't allow my emotional entanglements to drag them down. Clearly, Anna was no longer the person who loved me, at least not in the way I needed her to. She had fallen for someone else. She denied it frantically. I haven't. I don't like him. She was almost panicking as she looked at me. George, I've never liked him. The person I love has always been you. I asked, is that so? Do you believe what you're saying now? As I spoke, I glanced over her shoulder. Makoto had somehow appeared behind her, looking at her with pain in his eyes. His voice was hoarse as he asked, "Anna, do you really not love me?" He was drenched in rain, and his face was covered with water. Anna froze when she saw him. That brief moment of hesitation was all I needed to confirm my suspicion. I pried her hand away from my wrist and said, "Go find him. The rain's too heavy, and he's just been rescued. His body won't be able to take it." I couldn't be generous enough to bless them both, but Anna had taken care of me for 3 years while I lay in bed. I wouldn't deny that she loved me, perhaps. Up until now, I was still the one she loved most, but it was undeniable that she had fallen for Makoto. I had always been meticulous about love. I couldn't tolerate this kind of situation. This kind of indecisive love wasn't something I wanted. Anna finally reacted, shoving Makoto away and then turning to hug me from behind, saying, "I'm sorry, George. I only felt sorry for him. I swear, I'll never leave you again. You're the only one in my heart. You're the most important to me. Please don't leave." Her voice was choked with emotion as she said, "If I had known that saving him would cost me you, I would never have left you." Her words made Makoto freeze. His face twisted with anguish as he asked her in a voice that was almost torn apart, "I don't believe it. Anna, look me in the eye. Do you really have no feelings for me? I know I shouldn't have been with you, shouldn't have fallen in love with you, but feelings aren't something we can control. George was just the first one to appear in your life. If it weren't for him, we could have loved each other." "Shut up." Anna almost shouted in anger as she interrupted him. "The person I love is George, and it always will be. There's no future for us." Makoto yelled, "Stop lying to yourself. If you didn't love me, why did you leave him at the wedding and come straight to me?" This was the question I had been asking her too. Clearly, Anna couldn't figure out the answer, so she chose to remain silent. She stubbornly looked at me and said, "George, please believe me." Just as her hand was about to touch mine, a sweet yet furious voice rang out, "Why should he believe you?" I turned around in surprise, only to see a familiar yet unfamiliar face, beautiful and full of anger. Willow. I was stunned to see her suddenly appear, looking at me with a mixture of surprise and confusion. "Didn't you tell me to handle this on my own?" Willow didn't answer me. Instead, she moved directly into my arms, her eyes cold and steely as she looked at Anna. She said, "Show some respect. He's your brother-in-law." Chapter 18. The word brother-in-law struck Anna like a slap across the face. She seemed unable to bear it and rushed at Willow, ready to start a fight. She shouted, "What kind of relative are you? You know I love him. Why are you doing this to me?" Willow looked at her as though she had just heard a joke. She said, "If you really loved him, why give me this opportunity?" Anna froze as if she had been turned to stone, all her tears seemingly frozen in the rain. I couldn't tell if she had actually shed tears, but I saw her eyes were bloodshot. Willow gave her a glance and said, "If you want to come after me, feel free anytime, but he's my husband now. Please don't bother him again." With that, she calmly took my arm and led me back into the house. Once the door closed behind us, she impulsively kissed me, stopping me from moving. Her kiss was both forceful and seductive. Willow. Before I could even call her name, I tasted her tears. My heart tightened, and a strange feeling of pity for this woman surged within me. That night, I was rough with her. Though she couldn't handle it, she still acted like a little wildcat, scratching and clawing at me. She had become putty in my hands, but the only thing she could remember to whisper in my ear was a fierce warning, "Don't see her again." I had fallen into the vortex she had created, unaware of where I was, only able to vaguely nod. The following morning, Anna and Makoto faded from my life. I heard Anna had fallen seriously ill. The storm had drained her energy, and the people who had been waiting for us to fail kept their silence. Only Anna's parents came to see me, looking worn out, their faces full of anger. "George, you won." Lee's mother sneered, her tone dripping with sarcasm, but the exhaustion on her face gave her away. "Anna's in the hospital. Go see her." I frowned and replied, "She's probably with Makoto now. If not, you're her family." Lee's mother almost ground her teeth as she said with bitter resentment, in her heart, "Only you matter. You must be so proud." Even now, the only person she wants to see is you. I pinched the bridge of my nose. "I don't want to see her," I added. "The relationship between us is no longer suitable for us to meet again." They both understood what I meant. I was now her brother-in-law, and it was indeed inappropriate for us to see each other again. Lee's mother's eyes turned red, her voice quivering with emotion. "You really won't forgive her? What terrible thing has she done to deserve this from you?" I gave a bitter laugh. "She may not have done anything wrong. She only ran away from the wedding." At that, their faces grew darker. Lee's mother replied, "So what? What does that prove? She took care of you for 3 years when you were a vegetable. She never complained or ran off with another man. Doesn't that count for something?" I responded, "So I don't blame her for running away from the wedding. I don't blame her, but that's all there is to it. Our feelings can't go back to how they were." My voice was quiet as I said, Please leave now. It's over between us. Lee's mother looked at me in disbelief, and at that point, she was too emotional to continue reasoning. Lee's father stepped forward, his gaze icy. Are you really going to watch her die without treatment? I replied. That's a bit of an exaggeration. I said to them, it's just a breakup. Are you going to put her life in my hands? Lee's mother couldn't hold back any longer. She cried out, just go see her once. I'm begging you. I nodded, agreeing to her request. The abrupt end of my relationship with Anna needed closure, and I needed to make sure she wouldn't come after me again. But none of us had anticipated that Willow would insist on coming along. When Anna's parents saw Willow in the hospital room, their faces turned green in an instant. Lee's mother said coldly, George, we asked you to come alone. Why did you bring her? Willow immediately linked her arm through mine, looking at them with indifference as she replied, he's my husband. Wherever he goes, I have the right to be involved. Willow skillfully handled them while I pushed open the door to the hospital room and stepped inside. Anna was lying weakly in the bed, her condition as bad as they'd described. She had really fallen ill. When she saw me, she coughed a few times and struggled to sit up. George, you came. She forced a smile and said, I thought you'd never come to see me again. I nodded. From now on, we shouldn't meet again. This is the last time. She asked, why? Her eyes reddened, and she said, haven't you forgiven me yet? I shook my head. We're just brother-in-law and sister-in-law now. There's no need for forgiveness between us. The moment the words left my mouth, she closed her eyes as though she had heard something hopeless. Stop saying it. You must hate me, because hate meant caring, and if I didn't hate her, it meant I had moved on. I fell silent, unsure of how to explain myself. After a long while, I finally said softly, if you think I hate you, then yes, I hate you. She suddenly threw herself at me, clinging to me, her voice choking with emotion. Why don't you hate me? I've wronged you. You should hate me. Chapter 19. I let out a bitter laugh. So you do know that running away from the wedding in front of everyone was wrong, don't you? Her body stiffened suddenly, and she hurriedly apologized. I'm so sorry. I don't even know what happened. I don't know what I was thinking. Please, can you forgive me? I frowned. I just said that there's no need for forgiveness between us. Have you forgotten? I smiled faintly and said, I never blamed you in the first place. But the more I said that, the more her expression grew desperate. She said, then I don't want your forgiveness. Hate me, George. I'm begging you. Hate me. I sighed. Why would you want me to hate you? Our past was beautiful. I don't want to hate you. That would mean nothing to me. Can't you just settle down and be happy with Makoto? Suddenly, it seemed like she had found a lifeline. She looked into my eyes and said, I don't have any contact with him anymore. After that day, I kicked him out. From now on, I won't care about him. I'm so sorry, George. Really sorry. I shouldn't have treated you like that. I love you. You should know. How could he compare to you? I let out a long breath. Stop lying to me. You've fallen in love with him. I don't mind. When we were together, you treated me well, and you didn't wrong me. You took care of me when I was unconscious. So I'll wish you both the best. As I said that, my gaze instinctively shifted toward the bathroom, because I knew Makoto was there. I knew Anna well. She might think she loved me, and I believed her love, but that love had been split in half and given to someone else, and I didn't want that kind of love. I was aware that there were others present, but I still spoke those words because I knew this was the last time. Yet, Makoto clearly didn't think so. The next moment, he couldn't hold back any longer and stormed out of the bathroom. George, you're going too far. You don't deserve her love. Seeing him, Anna was also surprised. She asked, what are you doing here? She immediately frowned, her expression filled with impatience. Didn't I tell you to leave? Afterward, she looked at me warily, as if afraid I might get angry. George, I'm sorry. I didn't know he would be here. I shook my head and told her, we don't have anything between us anymore. Even if you're with him, I won't say anything. I smiled calmly. Of course, if you're with another man, I'll wish you more sincerely. After all, I glanced at Makoto. The reason I became a vegetable was to save him. Makoto immediately fell silent. After a long pause, he spoke, a hint of frustration in his voice. That's my debt to you, but Anna doesn't owe you anything. Why are you doing this to her? She loves you so much. I asked, is that so? Didn't you just say she had fallen for you but didn't realize it? His expression shifted immediately, and he was left speechless. Anna gazed at me with a look of sorrow, her eyes red as she spoke up. No matter what, I've always loved only you. I admit, I do have some sympathy for him, but compared to my love for you, it's nothing. You should understand that. I sighed deeply. Anna, I'm sorry. I can never accept love that's mixed with anything else. You should know that about me. Anna finally couldn't hold back her tears. She said, what if I kneel and beg you? What if I beg you to stay with me? Makoto's eyes reddened too. He said, please stay with her. I'm begging you. But the next second, a voice interrupted. What do you think you are, to beg him? The door to the hospital room was suddenly flung open, and Willow stepped in, Scoffing, she looked at Makoto and said, "You, of all people, are the least qualified to speak here." Makoto was startled to see her. After a moment, he regained his composure and said, You're Anna's sister, the one who took away the man she loved." Willow replied, "I didn't take him from her. She gave him up willingly." With a calm expression, Willow continued, "It's because he trusted you, that foolish man, that he lost the one he loved. She sowed the seeds of this herself." Makoto yelled, "That's because Anna doesn't love me. If she did, I'd be better for her than George ever was. George never loved her. He married you so quickly. He never deserved Anna's love." Willow asked, "Is that so? Running away from the wedding in front of everyone and making him the laughingstock of all. Do you really think that's love?" Willow sneered and went on, "I won't deny she loved him deeply before. She regrets it now. But for George, once love has impurities, once it cracks, it can't be repaired. And you are the stain." Willow looked at him with contempt and said, "You're the last person who has the right to speak, no matter what. George saved your life. Have you forgotten that? If it weren't for you, George would have married Anna and none of this would have happened. He saved you, and in return, he lost everything. His fiancée ran off during the wedding for you, and now you say he doesn't deserve her. The only person who doesn't deserve anything is you. You don't deserve George's life-saving grace." Makoto's face turned ashen, his hands nervously pressing against something behind him. I narrowed my eyes and realized he was live-streaming. He stammered, unable to form a coherent reply. Willow gave a cold laugh. "Am I wrong? Anna could never hurt George's heart like this with anyone else. But on the day of the wedding, she abandoned him for you. How do you think George would feel?" Chapter 20. I never expected Willow to understand me so well. Her voice was cold as she spoke. "This is a double betrayal. He saved your life, and yet, not only are you ungrateful, you've gone ahead and taken his woman." At this point, she shot Anna a sarcastic glance and continued, "I believe your feelings for George are real, but your sincerity is almost laughable. To fall for a man like him means you two were always meant to be together." Anna seemed deeply hurt, regretful as she looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, George. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have abandoned you. I promise I'll never see him again. I really don't have any feelings for him. Maybe a little sympathy, but the one I truly love has always been you." I looked at Anna and replied, "A lot of feelings start from sympathy. We can never go back," I said softly. Even Willow understood me. I couldn't accept love with impurities. Didn't Anna know that? Suddenly, Anna looked at Willow, desperate, and said, "What about her? Can she guarantee that she'll love you and only you for the rest of her life? Never be distracted?" She then turned to me, pleading, "George, I'll never make this mistake again. Give me another chance. You're the only person I've ever wanted to spend my life with. There's never been anyone else." Makoto choked back his words, looking at Anna and asking, "Have you really never loved me?" "Yes," Anna answered firmly. "I've never loved you. Maybe there was some pity, but I would never give up on George for you." Makoto finally gave up, throwing down his phone and leaving. The live stream was still ongoing, but Willow quickly cut the feed. Anna's face turned pale, and then she forced a bitter smile. "I can't believe I lost you because of a man like him." Makoto had been hiding in the bathroom, live streaming to make a fool of me, hoping to show everyone that Anna had fallen for someone else. But in the end, the person who was laughed at was him. Later, David angrily said, "I've never liked Makoto. You saved his life, and yet he steals your woman, and he has no remorse. All he does is put on an act in front of Anna. At least you have Willow. Those two got what they deserved. Otherwise, I'd feel so frustrated on your behalf." After that long night of conversation, I hadn't seen Anna in a while, but I heard she wasn't with Makoto. From then on, Makoto's reputation in the circle plummeted. He had tried to reach out to Anna many times, but David told me Anna had completely ignored him. No matter what, Willow was still her sister, and I thought we might cross paths occasionally. But I didn't expect Willow to avoid any chance of us meeting. I always thought of my marriage with Willow as a business arrangement, but over time, our relationship had gradually improved. I had thought about what Anna said. Could Willow really guarantee that she would love only me, with no distractions? I think the reason I didn't care about it was because I had no expectations of her. I didn't have any deep feelings for her to begin with. We were together because we were suited for marriage. Perhaps we didn't marry for love, but for shared interests and purposes. Without expectations, there was no dissatisfaction. What I didn't expect was how she gave me far more than I ever imagined, a sense of security. Most people mocked her for being a cold, aloof beauty who had suddenly turned into a love-struck woman, the kind of person she'd never considered becoming, an ideal wife and mother. She had never made any promises to me, but her actions showed me that I was the only one for her. She said, "I spend most of my time on work, and only a small part on life. Believe me or not, I have no extra energy to develop feelings for other men." One time, Willow looked at me seriously and said, "I'm not someone who feels deeply about emotions. I'm not as kind as Anna. Who can feel sympathy and affection for other men? I can be cold-blooded, but I'll never be indifferent to you. She sounded a little sarcastic when she mentioned kindness. I couldn't help but laugh. All right, it's been a long time. Don't hold on to that anymore. Life continued. Slow and warm. Willow became pregnant. The arrival of this child made Willow very happy. And gradually, people began to forget about my past with Anna. I think Anna would eventually move on too. Later, at my child's first birthday party, Anna finally appeared before me after a long time. She didn't say anything. Her hair cut short, looking like the bright, youthful girl she once was, though now with a touch more maturity. She handed me a gift, and Willow, wary, didn't allow me to interact with her too much. Anna gave a faint smile and said, "You don't need to be so nervous. I've let go of him." After that, she left the gift and a letter before leaving. Willow insisted that I open the letter in front of her, and I couldn't refuse. The letter read, "I've let you go, but you'll always be in my heart, George. When you were by my side, I was a person full of emotions. I could love, I could hate, and I could feel sympathy for others. But I didn't expect that this abundance of emotions would tear us apart and make you leave my side. Now, I've become an empty shell, unable to love, unable to hate. When I realized this, it was too late. I've completely lost you. If I could do it all over again." She didn't finish her sentence, and I couldn't bring myself to read any more. Yes, just like she said, it was too late. I have my life, and she has her future. I'll walk my own path, without compromise, without regret.